I stood in the entryway of my younger sister Mara's house, the warm glow from the dining room casting light onto the hardwood floor. Laughter echoed from inside. Familiar voices, familiar rhythms. But not one of them had noticed me standing there. I had parked a block away, unsure why I was even coming. I hadn't received a call, a text, not even a Facebook message. It was my birthday, 62 years old, and no one, not Mara, not Ava, not Derek, had said a word. But I had a sinking feeling in my gut when I saw Mara's post that morning. "Big dinner tonight for someone special," she'd written. No names, no tags, just a vague caption under a photo of her famous red velvet cake. So I dressed in something soft but simple, a navy blue cardigan over a floral blouse, and drove over with the photo album I had wrapped for myself the night before. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was for someone else. Maybe, just maybe, they really hadn't forgotten. But as I stepped quietly into the house and saw the long dining table, my chest tightened. The table was set for 12. Name cards at every setting. A pink one, with Ava in cursive. One that read, Uncle Mark. Even a spot labeled Baby Grace. Every seat filled. Every face accounted for. Except mine. No extra chair. No place for me to squeeze in. No last-minute seat with mismatched silverware. Nothing. It was as if I'd never existed. Ava caught sight of me first. Her face dropped, not in surprise, but in discomfort. The kind of look you give when someone catches you doing something you shouldn't. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Derek looked up next, mid-bite, and nearly dropped his fork. Mara, still holding the birthday cake with candles lit, froze like someone had hit pause on the entire evening. The silence was suffocating. In that moment, I saw it clearly. This wasn't a mistake. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen to leave me out. I took a breath, not deep, just enough to steady my hands. I walked slowly to the gift table where a pile of neatly wrapped boxes and bags sat beneath a "Happy Birthday" sign strung in glittering gold. I reached into the stack and pulled out the package I had wrapped myself, the photo album. Inside were decades of birthdays. Ava's 5th when she spilled ice cream on her dress. Derek's 16th when I let him drive for the first time. Even Mara's 40th, which I threw for her after her divorce when she couldn't stop crying in the bathroom. No one moved, not a word, not even a stammered excuse. I turned around, photo album in hand, and looked at each of them. Mara still held the cake. The candles flickered weakly like they too were unsure whether to keep burning. "I see you already started the party," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't crack. I was surprised by how calm I felt. "Thanks for the invitation." I didn't wait for them to speak. I didn't need to. I walked back through the front door, stepped into the cool night, and closed it gently behind me. It wasn't rage that filled me as I walked to my car. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was something quieter, heavier, a kind of stillness you only feel when the final piece clicks into place. And it doesn't belong to you. In the rearview mirror, I could still see the house, the windows aglow with the life I had once helped build. I placed the album on the passenger seat beside me and drove home in silence. I never got my cake. I never opened a single card. But I took my gift and left before dessert. If you had asked me 10 years ago what I lived for, I would have said my family, without skipping a beat. I was the kind of woman who didn't just show up for people. I built my entire life around them. My husband William used to joke that I had enough love in me to parent the whole block. And maybe he was right. When he passed away suddenly from a heart attack 12 years ago, I didn't take time to collapse. I couldn't afford to. I had 2 kids who still needed packing lunches, parent-teacher conferences, rides to work, and a steady roof over their heads. So I swallowed my grief and carried the load for all of us. Ava was 22 then, finishing college, bright and ambitious. Derek had just turned 18, sensitive and unsure of the world. They were mine, my heart outside my body. And I devoted myself to their survival, their success. There were nights I stayed up late sewing Derek's torn work pants, and mornings I packed little care boxes for Ava, with her favorite tea and notes that said, "You've got this." Not because I had to, because I wanted to. I never remarried, not because I didn't believe in love, but because my family felt like enough. They were my focus, my pride. I hosted every Thanksgiving and made 3 different types of stuffing to please everyone. I organized birthday parties, took care of aging relatives, remembered anniversaries and allergies. I even helped Mara, my younger sister, through the roughest divorce I've ever witnessed, letting her and her daughter stay in my guest room for 7 months while she got back on her feet. And honestly, I didn't mind. I liked being needed. It gave me purpose. For a while, things felt warm, stable. Every Sunday we had dinner at my house. Ava would bring dessert, Derek would sneak bites before dinner, and Mara would talk too loudly over everyone. It was chaotic, but it was ours. We had traditions. Ava always insisted we do a group photo by the fireplace. Derek rolled his eyes but stood still. Even when work and life got busy, we made time. They came to me for advice, for recipes, for support. I knew every detail of their lives. Ava's tricky pregnancy, Derek's struggle with his first job, Mara's custody battles. I was the thread holding everyone together. Looking back now, I realize I thought I was indispensable. That no matter how messy life got, they would always need me the way I needed them. That's the thing about being the reliable one. You start to believe that your presence is unshakable, irreplaceable, like a family heirloom no one would dare throw out. But I started to notice, quietly at first, how the calls got shorter, how the updates became fewer. Mara stopped asking for help with Grace's school events. Ava would tell me about big things, like a job promotion, after it had already happened. Derek stopped texting unless he needed something, and I told myself it was normal. Kids grow up. Siblings move on. I was probably being too sensitive. Besides, they still came around, still hugged me at the door, still called me Mom and Lena and Auntie with affection. I never questioned how much I gave, only how much I loved. But love, I've learned, is not a guarantee of loyalty. Just because you pour your soul into people doesn't mean they'll carry it with care. Sometimes they hold it carelessly. Sometimes they drop it without even noticing. Still, I clung to what we had. I kept the fridge stocked with their favorites. I mailed birthday cards 2 weeks early just to be safe. I reminded them to wear sunscreen, to drink water, to check their tires before road trips. Little things. But it was how I said, "I'm still here. I still care." I didn't see the shift for what it was. Not yet. I mistook distance for independence, coldness for busyness. I believed that we were still the family we always had been, that they loved me the way I loved them. Deeply, endlessly, no matter what. And maybe they did. Once. But something was starting to fade, and I refused to believe it could be permanent. Because who gets forgotten by the people they built their world around? Who gets erased from their own story? Apparently, I would soon find out. It was Thanksgiving, the kind of day that used to give me butterflies. I always loved the bustle of it. The warm cinnamon scent of sweet potatoes in the oven, the shrill whistle of the kettle just before guests arrived, the familiar clatter of shoes and laughter tumbling into my house. But this year, something felt off before it even began. It started with a text, or rather, the absence of one. For years, we'd followed the same rhythm. I hosted, of course. It had become tradition ever since William passed. Everyone knew. Lena's house, 3 p.m., come hungry. The day before, I'd send out a cheerful reminder, and my phone would buzz with responses. Mara confirming the pumpkin pie, Ava asking if she could bring wine, Derek complaining about traffic. But this year, silence. I waited until noon, then caved and messaged the group thread. Just checking. Still good for 3 tomorrow? 5 minutes. 10. Then a ping from Mara. "Oh, I thought we were doing it at my place this year. Didn't Ava tell you?" My thumb hovered over the screen. Tell me. Tell me what? I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and typed back, no, I hadn't heard. What time should I come by? Another delay. Then, we moved it up to 1. Figured we'd eat early since Grace has dance class. No apology, no, sorry we forgot to loop you in. Just a casual reshuffling of the one constant tradition I had left. I didn't reply. I didn't trust myself to. The next morning, I woke up early and baked anyway. It was automatic. I made stuffing from scratch, even though no one had asked for it. I layered the green bean casserole and poured my heart into the gravy. By the time the clock struck noon, my kitchen smelled like the holidays. But it sat in heavy silence. At 12:45, I drove over with a store-bought pie in my lap and tension curling in my gut. When I arrived, they were already seated around the table, half-eaten plates in front of them. Mara's dining room was smaller than mine, but they looked comfortable. Too comfortable. Ava waved, surprised. Derek muttered, "Hey, Ma," with a mouthful of mashed potatoes. No one stood. No one offered a hug. I placed the pie on the sideboard, smiled politely, and slid into the only remaining seat at the very end of the table, the one they had pulled from the patio. I tried not to take it personally, but it felt like a folding chair in more ways than one. The conversation flowed as if I weren't there. Mara and Ava debated daycare options for Grace. Derek showed someone a meme on his phone. At one point, I reached to pass the cranberry sauce, and Mara interrupted. "Oh no, Lena. We've all had some. Don't worry." I froze for half a second. A tiny moment. A flicker. But I felt it. That was the first crack in the glass. I excused myself before dessert and drove home. The food I had spent hours making still sat on my stove. Untouched. Unloved. I opened the Tupperware, inhaled the scent, and cried into a napkin. Quietly. Shamefully. Like a child who didn't get picked in a game she created. Still, I chalked it up to miscommunication. I convinced myself they were busy, overwhelmed. I didn't want to believe they could forget me, not after everything. But in the pit of my stomach, something told me that Thanksgiving was no accident. It was the beginning of a new reality. One where I no longer had a front row seat in their lives. And yet, I didn't confront them. I didn't speak up. I smoothed it over with a smile and kept showing up, hoping they'd notice the space between us widening. They didn't. Or maybe they did, and liked it better that way. After that Thanksgiving, something in me shifted, but I couldn't bring myself to name it yet. I tried to move forward like always, with grace, with excuses. I told myself they were distracted, that life was busy, that I'd just been overlooked, that next time would be different. But next time never came. Or if it did, I wasn't included. What began as a missed dinner invite turned into something quieter, harder to explain, the kind of neglect that doesn't make headlines but hollows you out slowly like water carving stone. Ava used to call me twice a week, sometimes just to vent about work or ask what herbs to put in chicken soup. Now she texted, briefly, often just emojis or short replies, no more long updates, no more sharing dreams about starting her own boutique or laughing about how baby Grace had inherited my stubborn streak. Her messages grew sparse, like someone dropping breadcrumbs instead of real conversation. One Friday, I sent her a photo of an old dress I'd found in storage, one she wore to prom, pale blue with sequins. I wrote, "Found this today. Remember how we had to sew the hem last minute? You looked so beautiful that night." She responded hours later with, "Wow, that feels like forever ago." That was it. No heart, no fond memory, no warmth. Derek was no better. He'd always been the quieter one, but lately he'd become distant in a way that felt deliberate. He used to call me Mama when he wanted something or when life hit hard. But now, weeks would pass without a single word. When I reached out, he'd answer with one-liners. "Good here. Busy. Can't talk now." It was like talking to a stranger wearing my son's face. And Mara, my own sister who had once sobbed into my arms during her worst nights, had taken to treating me like a houseplant. Polite hellos, surface-level chats, but no real connection. No more remember when, no more leaning on me, and definitely no checking in on how I was doing. I started to feel like a ghost, present but not seen, heard but not listened to. The group chat we used to share, Quinn fam so Sidel, slowly dried up. They still messaged in it from time to time, but I noticed they'd often reference things I had no context for, plans that had already happened, outings I hadn't been invited to. That brunch last weekend was hilarious, Mara wrote once. Grace still talks about the waiter's hair. I stared at the message, confused. I hadn't even known they'd gone out. There wasn't a single moment where someone said, "We don't need you anymore." That would have been easier, somehow. What hurt worse was how their love became convenient, conditional, dependent on whether I was useful. If I offered to babysit, they responded. If I asked to visit, they were too busy. One Sunday, I cooked dinner for just myself. I'd kept the habit, hoping someone might drop by. They didn't. I plated the food, sat at the table, and realized I hadn't heard anyone call me Mom out loud in nearly 3 weeks. I used to believe that love, once built, was unshakable. That all the sacrifices I made, skipping vacations, staying up late to sew Halloween costumes, emptying my savings to help Mara get a lawyer, meant something permanent. That I had earned my place in their lives. But families aren't cement. They're sand. If you stop tending to the shape, it blows apart piece by piece. And yet, I didn't cry. Not then. I just got quieter. I started declining invitations to events I wasn't truly invited to. I stopped reminding them to take jackets, to pay their bills on time, to call Grandpa. I sat back and watched what happened when I stopped filling in the gaps. No one noticed. Or worse, maybe they did, and they preferred it that way. It happened on a Saturday evening in early spring, one of those rare nights when everyone was actually in the same room. Ava had invited me to what she called a casual family hangout at Mara's place. Nothing formal, just snacks, wine, and board games. I almost didn't go. After all the small exclusions, all the moments that made me feel like an afterthought, part of me wanted to stay home and read a book. But I missed them. I missed the noise, the jokes, the chaotic closeness we used to share. So I went. Mara's living room was packed when I arrived. Derek and Ava were already on the couch, Grace was on the floor coloring, and Mara stood by the kitchen island refilling drinks. I stepped in and smiled, setting down the banana bread I'd baked that morning. "Oh, Lena," Mara said, waving half-heartedly. "You made it. We weren't sure if you got the text." I nodded. I did. A little late, but I'm here. Ava glanced up from her phone, smiled quickly, and went right back to scrolling. Derek gave me a casual, "Hey, Mom," without looking up. I told myself not to take it personally. People were tired, distracted. I found a chair in the corner, near the window, and tried to engage. Asking how Grace's school recital went, if Ava's boutique job was still going well. But the answers were short, distracted, as if they had already moved on before I finished speaking. Eventually, Mara pulled out a board game, one of those party games that involves questions and fast answers. I used to love games like that. We used to play them as a family for hours on holidays. I was glad to see something familiar. Maybe this would lighten the mood. We formed a loose circle. I was between Ava and Mara. Derek read out a card. Who in this room is most likely to forget why they walked into a room? Laughter bubbled around the room. Aunt Lena, Ava said immediately, grinning. Definitely Lena, Mara added. She's always been a bit spacey. Derek chuckled. Remember when she put salt instead of sugar in those brownies? Or when she called me 3 times in one day because she forgot we'd already talked? Ava laughed. They were smiling, laughing. Everyone was, except me. My face held a tight smile, but inside, something recoiled. It wasn't the joke itself. It was the way they all jumped in so easily. How natural it was for them to turn me into the punchline, and it didn't stop there. Later in the game, the question was, who in the room would survive the least amount of time on a desert island? Lena, Mara said immediately, reaching for more chips. She'd probably try to organize a rescue team and die of stress. More laughter. No one noticed I hadn't said a word in 10 minutes. No one noticed I wasn't laughing, and that was the moment it hit me. Not in a dramatic, tear-filled way, but in a dull, echoing thud. I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being mocked. I had become a character in their comedy, a harmless, forgettable supporting role, the well-meaning old aunt who bakes too much, forgets names, and says awkward things. Except I wasn't senile. I wasn't helpless. I was just not seen. And when they looked at me, really looked at me, all they saw was someone who would smile through anything, someone they could laugh at without consequence. Because I wouldn't snap. I wouldn't fight back. I'd just nod, chuckle weakly, and go home. So that's what I did. As the laughter swelled around me, I quietly stood, pretending I had to use the bathroom. Instead, I grabbed my purse, walked to the front door, and let myself out. The night air was sharp and cool, but it felt better than the warmth inside. I sat in my car for a long time before driving home, not crying, not angry, just humiliated, and more alone than I had felt in a very long time. I didn't make an announcement. There was no dramatic storming out, no long-winded message about how hurt I felt. I just faded. After that game night, I stopped reaching out. I didn't call Ava to ask about Grace's new school. I didn't send Derek recipes he'd never acknowledge. I didn't offer to help Mara with her spring garden like I had every year. I simply stepped back, the way you instinctively pull your hand away from a stove once it burns you enough times. And no one noticed. Not at first. That was the part that stung the most. I told myself I wasn't angry. I wasn't being petty or trying to teach anyone a lesson. I was tired. Tired of being the one who always initiated, always followed up, always kept track of birthdays and dentist appointments, and who liked which kind of jam. Tired of being laughed at. Tired of giving so much love into a space that gave me only silence in return. It was like I had been holding the frame of a family portrait for years, pressing it tightly against the wall while everyone else walked away. 1 week passed, then 2, still nothing. The group chat remained quiet. Ava didn't call, Derek didn't text. Mara sent a blurry photo of Grace at a dance recital, but it went to a separate thread, the one she now shared with Ava and Derek, but had long stopped including me in. That was when I understood. They weren't waiting for me. They didn't even notice I was gone. The next Sunday, I sat in my kitchen with the familiar ache that always came around 5 p.m. It was the time our old dinners would begin. I'd cook for hours, set the table with the old chipped plates Ava once said felt like home, and wait for the doorbell. Now the stove was cold, the plates were in the cabinet, and I sat alone with a cup of tea and a silence so loud it pressed against my ribs. I didn't cry. Instead, I got up, walked into the guest bedroom, and opened the closet. Inside was a box labeled William. I hadn't touched it in years. Not because I forgot him, but because I had been too busy holding everything else together. Inside were old letters, a few shirts, and a card he once wrote me for my 40th birthday. "You make this house a home," it said in his messy handwriting. "You hold us all in place." I sat there for a long time, staring at that line, and I realized maybe that's who I had always been, the one who held it all in place, the glue, the background, the woman behind the curtain keeping the lights on and the floors swept and the hearts comforted. But glue isn't seen, only felt when it's missing. So I stopped showing up, not with anger, not with revenge, just stillness. I skipped Mara's birthday. No one asked where I was. I didn't text Ava on her work anniversary. No one noticed. When Derek posted pictures from a friend's wedding, I liked the photo but said nothing more. No heart emojis. No, "You look so handsome, sweetie," I just observed, quietly, from a distance. And as the days went by, I felt something strange. Relief. For the first time in decades, I wasn't constantly waiting for someone to need me. I wasn't chasing affection or wondering what I'd done wrong. I wasn't baking love into loaves of banana bread that went uneaten. I was just me. A woman. A mother. A sister. Alone, yes. But not invisible anymore. At least not to myself. The world didn't collapse. The family didn't come banging on my door. Nothing dramatic happened. But in that slow unraveling, something powerful began. They thought I was done, that I had taken the hint, bowed out, and accepted my place on the sidelines. What they didn't realize was that I hadn't given up. I was just getting ready to stand up. Not for them, but for me. It was my birthday. That morning, I woke up to the sound of my neighbor's dog barking. The sky outside my bedroom window was a perfect blue, the kind that usually makes you smile just a little as you stretch and start your day. But I didn't smile. I didn't stretch. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the stillness of my house. No messages, no calls, no knocks on the door. I checked my phone just to be sure. Maybe someone had sent a text in the middle of the night, or maybe the group chat had come alive again. But all I saw was a promotional message from my phone carrier and a discount from a candle store I hadn't shopped at in years. Not one of them had remembered. Ava, my daughter, Derek, my son, Mara, my sister, even Grace, who once made me a hand-drawn birthday card with the words, "Best aunt ever" in glitter. Nothing. I sat at the kitchen table alone, still in my nightgown. The sunlight streamed in like any normal day. It was supposed to feel special. 62 is no grand milestone, but still, a birthday should mean something. I had spent decades making sure theirs did. Cakes, parties, surprise breakfasts, handwritten notes tucked into cards. I made it a day. For them. But no one had done the same for me. I looked at the photo album I had wrapped the night before. Something I bought and assembled myself. Dozens of old family pictures, carefully chosen, printed, and glued onto pages, with captions in my neat handwriting. The gift was meant to be from them, a way to pretend, to trick my heart into thinking I still mattered. I had placed it in a silver box with a lavender ribbon and written, "To Mom." With love. Now it sat unopened in the center of the table. Around noon, I made myself a small lunch. Leftover chicken, toast, and a single candle stuck into a blueberry muffin. I lit it, stared at the flickering flame, and tried to summon a wish. Nothing came. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat there, holding the muffin, watching the candle slowly melt and burn down until wax spilled over onto the plate. It wasn't sadness at first. It was numbness. The kind that seeps into your bones, settles behind your eyes, and makes everything feel too quiet. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I felt erased, like I'd been slowly fading from their picture for years, and this was the day I realized I was no longer in the frame at all. Around 2 p.m., I went for a walk, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. I wandered through the neighborhood, past houses with balloons on the mailboxes, children playing in sprinklers, families grilling in their driveways. Everyone else seemed to be living, connected, remembered. And I was just a woman with a birthday no one celebrated. I came home and did the only thing that gave me any comfort. I opened a box from the closet, the one labeled "Old Letters." Inside were notes from my children years ago in crayon and colored pencil. "Mom, you're the best cooker ever. I love when we cuddle on the couch. Thanks for taking me to the museum even though it was raining." I held them in my lap, reading each one like scripture, as if I could resurrect the versions of them that had written those words. The little hands that had clung to mine, the sleepy faces that had once leaned against my shoulder during long car rides. They had loved me. Once. So what changed? I didn't know how to answer that. But that night, as I sat on the couch in silence with the glow of the lamp warming the room, I felt something finally give way inside me. A quiet, heavy release. I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the way someone does when they've held it in too long. The kind of crying that leaves you emptied out. Not just because they forgot, but because I finally stopped pretending that I mattered to them the way they still mattered to me. And that was the lowest point I'd ever reached. Not the silence, not the birthday, but the realization that the people I had built my entire world around had left me behind. And I was the last one to notice. The day after my birthday, I woke up feeling hollow. It wasn't just sadness anymore, it was disorientation, like I had stepped out of my life and into someone else's. I moved through the motions, brushed my teeth, fed the cat, watered the wilting spider plant in the kitchen window. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I kept glancing at my phone like maybe I had missed something. Maybe a message was coming. Nothing. Not a text from Ava, no sorry mom from Derek, no belated phone call, nothing from Mara, who usually at least sent a meme or a forwarded chain message from Facebook with glittery flowers and the words, "Happy birthday, sis." By mid-afternoon, I gave up and sank into the couch with a blanket and a cup of chamomile tea, hoping to numb my mind with television. Instead, I opened Facebook. Scrolling felt automatic. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just distraction. But then, something caught my eye. Mara had posted a photo. Several, actually. A carousel. The first image was of her living room, decorated in gold and lavender balloons. There was a banner hanging above her mantel that read, "Happy Birthday, Lena." My name, in big silver letters. I froze. The second photo showed a table set for dinner, 12 place settings, wine glasses, candles. I recognized Ava's red scarf on the chair to the left. I recognized Derek's jacket draped on the back of another. There was a cake in the center of the table, already half cut. The caption read, "Celebrating our amazing Lena tonight." What a beautiful evening full of laughter and love. I stared at it. Again and again. My stomach dropped. A cold, sickening wave of confusion washed over me. Celebrating me? Tonight? But I hadn't been there. No one had told me. There had been no call, no text, nothing. I clicked through the photos with trembling fingers. There they all were. Ava holding Grace, Derek smiling with a wine glass in hand, Mara mid-laugh with her boyfriend beside her. A few cousins I hadn't seen in years, all gathered, smiling, drinking, celebrating. Me. And I wasn't even in the room. I blinked hard. For a moment, I thought maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe this was from a past year, an old memory reposted. But no, the date said it all. Yesterday, my birthday. I sat in stunned silence, the glow of the screen burning into my eyes. Slowly, I scrolled down to the comments. So sweet, she must have loved the surprise. What a lovely way to honor her. Hope Lena felt special. Each one stabbed deeper than the last. Because I hadn't felt special. I hadn't felt anything. I had been home alone with a muffin and a candle, thinking they had forgotten. But they hadn't forgotten. They had remembered. They had remembered without me. I didn't know what hurt more, that they had celebrated my birthday, or that they had done it behind my back and pretended I'd been part of it. I refreshed the page just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. No tag, no mention, no message. Just a polished lie for the world to see. A celebration that erased the guest of honor. I sat on the couch, the blanket twisted in my lap, my tea gone cold on the side table. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel until then. Betrayed. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't poor communication. This was deliberate. They had excluded me, then tried to cover it up like I was some distant memory instead of their mother, their sister, the woman who had spent her life showing up for every single one of them. And then came the realization I hadn't been ready for. Maybe I didn't matter to them anymore. Not the way they still mattered to me. Not enough to include, Not enough to remember, honestly, not enough to face. I closed the app and set my phone face down on the coffee table. In the quiet that followed, something shifted. Not rage, not even sorrow. It was clarity. Cold, clear, and sharp. I wasn't part of their family story anymore. I was a page they had already turned. But I wasn't finished writing my chapter. I didn't leave the house the next day. I didn't clean or fold laundry or try to busy myself like I usually did when something hurt too much. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring out the window at the neighbor's wind chimes swaying in the breeze, feeling empty. But not the kind of empty that makes you want to curl up and disappear. This was different. This was the kind of emptiness that comes after a long silence, the moment just before something new begins. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't rushing to fix anything. I wasn't making excuses for anyone, not even in my head. I wasn't softening the truth with, they didn't mean it, or maybe they're just overwhelmed. I had spent too many years brushing pain under the rug with one hand while holding everyone else together with the other. Now, I was just sitting in the truth. And surprisingly, it felt steady, solid, like stone beneath my feet after years of standing in sand. That morning, I opened the gift I had wrapped for myself, the photo album. Slowly, I turned the pages. There was Ava in pigtails, covered in paint during a second-grade art fair. Derek asleep in the laundry basket at age 4. Mara holding a bouquet of wildflowers I had picked for her after her divorce, her eyes swollen from crying but smiling anyway. So many memories, so much love, so much of me poured into all of them. And for what? I used to think that love like mine was enough to sustain a family, that if I kept showing up, kept giving, kept remembering birthdays and buying the right gifts and making the perfect meals, they would always come back, that they would always love me like I loved them. But sitting there, flipping through the past, I realized something that hit harder than any birthday dinner I had been excluded from. I had been loving them harder than they had been seeing me. And worse, I had made that okay. I had taught them it was acceptable, that I would keep giving no matter how little I got in return. And I couldn't blame them for that anymore, because I was the one who set that standard. I had been so afraid of being left behind that I'd offered myself up piece by piece until there wasn't much left to recognize. I was their emotional safety net, their emergency contact, their holiday planner, their cushion, but never their priority, never someone they had to consider. I closed the album and set it down gently on the table, and that's when something shifted inside me, quietly, like the way the air changes before a storm. I realized I didn't want to feel that kind of small anymore. I didn't want to keep waiting on people who only showed up when it was convenient. I didn't want to chase love that I had already earned 100 times over. I wasn't just a mother, or a sister, or an aunt. I was a woman. A whole woman with thoughts and dreams and value, even if they couldn't see it anymore. And just because they couldn't see me didn't mean I wasn't there. That was the beginning of my awakening. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no grand gesture, no tearful vow to change everything. It was one quiet decision. I'm done begging for a seat at a table I set myself. So I opened my laptop and started looking at art classes at the community center. I used to love painting before William died, before life got swallowed up by motherhood and caretaking and responsibility. I bookmarked a class that met every Thursday night. Watercolors and wine. Then I called a woman from my book club I had always admired. Her name was Celia, widowed, smart, kind, the sort of woman who always remembered your favorite author. I asked if she wanted to grab coffee sometime soon. Her voice lit up. I'd love that. And just like that, I began choosing me again. Not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but out of the quiet understanding that I was still here. Still whole. Still worthy of being seen, even if it was no longer by them. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't tell anyone I was changing. I'd done enough talking in my life, enough explaining and hoping and justifying. This time, I just moved quietly, deliberately, like a woman finally reclaiming the air around her. The shift started small. I cleared out the hallway closet, donating coats and old shoes that belonged to people who never came by anymore. I boxed up the crystal wine glasses I'd been saving for family holidays that never happened. I made space, not just in my home, but in my life. Every drawer I cleaned, every shelf I emptied, felt like I was peeling back layers of someone else's story. The woman who made sure everyone else was fed, warm, and comfortable was still there, but she didn't need to be in the background anymore. She could step forward now. She deserved to. I opened a new bank account, not because I needed to hide anything, but because I wanted something that was just mine. No joint emergencies, no family bailouts, just a space where every dollar reflected a choice I made for myself. I registered for the watercolor class. Thursday nights, 10 minutes from my house. I hadn't held a paintbrush in years, but I remembered the way it felt. The soft drag of bristles across textured paper, the way color pooled and bled and blended like a secret being revealed. I bought a new set of paints and brushes, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of anticipation. I also called Celia. We met for coffee at a little cafe on Main Street. She showed up wearing a bright scarf and a smile that made me feel like someone had seen me for the first time in months. We talked for 2 hours about everything but family. She asked what books I'd loved lately. I couldn't even remember the last one I'd finished. That changed the next day. I picked up a novel and gave myself permission to read purely for joy, and I stopped answering calls I didn't feel ready for. When Ava finally texted 4 days after my birthday with a casual, "Hey, hope you had a good one," things got hectic on our end. I didn't reply right away. I read the message, felt its hollowness, and let it sit. 2 days later, I simply wrote, "It was quiet. Hope you're well." That was it. No guilt. No pouring out my heart. No need to rehash what she already knew deep down. I wasn't playing the role of the hurt, invisible mother. I wasn't playing any role at all. I was just being real, honest, me. Derek called the next week. I didn't answer. He didn't leave a voicemail. Mara sent a message about a family brunch she was hosting that weekend. "Would love to see you," it said. But the text came with no apology, no acknowledgement of what had passed. It felt like someone putting wallpaper over a crack in the wall. I didn't go. I spent that Sunday walking through the farmer's market instead, alone, but not lonely. I bought a bunch of sunflowers and an overpriced jar of honey. A local band played acoustic music near the fountain, and I sat on a bench and let the music fill up the parts of me that used to ache. At night, I started writing again. Just little things, memories, observations, fragments of myself I didn't want to lose. I bought a leather-bound journal and wrote on the first page, "You are not an afterthought." I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I wasn't waiting for anyone else to give me permission to move forward. The silent setup wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making a scene or demanding apologies. It was about reclaiming my life. Brick by brick, hour by hour, I was building something new, something rooted in self-respect, in boundaries, in quiet power, and no one saw it coming, because no one had been looking, but soon they would. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. My silence didn't scream, it whispered, a quiet retreat, the kind you don't recognize until the absence becomes louder than the presence ever was. I stopped replying immediately. I no longer rushed to answer their texts or return their missed calls. I stopped liking their posts or sending heart emojis under their photos. The digital breadcrumbs that once marked my constant presence vanished, and in their place, nothing. I thought it would take weeks for them to realize. It didn't. It took days. Mara was the first to reach out again. She sent a long voice note, her preferred method of communication, since it allowed her to speak without interruption. "Hey, sis, I've just been thinking about you. Things have been crazy over here, of course, but I noticed you've been kind of quiet. Grace misses you. I do too. Let's catch up soon, okay? I didn't respond, not because I was trying to punish her, but because I didn't feel ready to step back into a role I hadn't consented to in months. Her message didn't acknowledge what had happened. It danced around it, soft and vague, as if my silence had come out of nowhere. The power wasn't in ignoring her. It was in finally recognizing that I didn't owe anyone an immediate response. Ava followed a few days later. She called twice in one evening, then texted, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a full minute before putting the phone down. I poured myself a glass of iced tea, sat on the back porch, and let the spring breeze drift over me. I could feel it, a slow but steady shift. The balance of our relationship had changed. I wasn't chasing anymore, I was choosing, and I was being missed. It wasn't just that they noticed I wasn't answering, it was how they noticed. Ava called again the next morning. This time she left a voicemail. "Hi, Mom. I realized I never said happy birthday. Not properly. I've been meaning to reach out. Things have been insane, but I know that's not an excuse. Can we please talk?" There it was. The tiniest crack in her wall, an admission, a note of guilt. But I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't need to, because for once they were sitting in the discomfort. The silence that I used to fill with reassurance, with sweetness, with effort. That silence now had weight, and it was pressing on them. I began to see subtle signs. Ava tagged me in a post, a nostalgic throwback of the two of us baking cookies when she was 8. Derek emailed me an article about senior travel groups, writing, "Thought this might be fun for you." Suddenly, they were extending olive branches. Subtle, clumsy, but still. They were reaching, and I wasn't reaching back, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Because I had spent too long being the safety net, always there to catch, to cushion, to support. And once I stepped back, they started to wobble. They realized just how much they had relied on my emotional labor to keep everything together. I didn't say a word about the birthday dinner. Not to Mara, not to Ava, not even to Derek. But I could feel it in their voices, in their attempts, in their sudden hesitations. They knew I had seen the photos. They knew I hadn't forgotten, and they didn't know what to do with that. Meanwhile, I was changing. I wasn't waiting by the phone. I was in my art class, laughing with strangers who didn't expect anything from me except to try and have fun. I was having coffee with Celia, taking walks by the lake, reading whole novels in one sitting without feeling like I should be doing something for someone else. And every time they tried to re-enter my world, I paused and asked myself, is this invitation sincere? Or is it another obligation waiting to wrap itself around me? For the first time in years, I had the power to say no and mean it. I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to explain. My quiet distance had become its own kind of strength. And slowly, they were learning that the version of me who once begged to be included didn't live here anymore. She had packed her things, locked the door behind her, and started building something new. The conversation didn't happen the way I used to imagine it would. In the past, I pictured something dramatic. Maybe I'd show up unannounced, confront them all in one room, slam my hand on the table, and finally pour out everything I had been holding in, all the quiet slights, the forgotten moments, the careless words. I'd demand answers. They'd look ashamed. There'd be apologies and maybe tears. But real life doesn't work that way. And when the time finally came, it happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. No build-up, no audience, just me and Ava, standing in my driveway. She had called earlier again, and I hadn't answered. I was pruning my rose bushes when I heard the sound of a car pulling in. When I turned, she was stepping out of her SUV, holding something wrapped in a small paper bag. An apology, perhaps, or a peace offering. "Hi, Mom," she said, soft and hesitant, like she wasn't sure how welcome she was. I nodded, set down my gardening gloves, and wiped my hands on my apron. "Hi." She didn't speak for a moment. just looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time in months. "I brought you tea," she said finally, holding up the bag. "Your favorite, Earl Grey with lavender." I took it with a quiet, "Thank you," then gestured toward the porch. "You want to sit?" She nodded, and we walked in silence to the chairs overlooking the yard. The breeze was warm. A bird chirped from the tree overhead. It was a peaceful day, one I had planned to spend alone. "I've been trying to figure out what to say," she started, "but every time I rehearse it, it sounds like an excuse." I said nothing. She took a deep breath. "I messed up. We all did. And I think part of me assumed you'd just be okay with it, that you'd forgive us like you always do." Her voice cracked then, and she blinked hard, staring out at the street like it held answers. "I saw the pictures," I said gently, "of the birthday dinner." She winced. "I figured." "I wasn't invited, Ava." "I know." Silence. She turned to me then, really turned, her eyes red-rimmed. It wasn't some calculated thing. It was Mara's idea, and she thought it would be easier, less pressure. We told ourselves you might not want a fuss. And God, I just went along with it. I didn't stop her. I didn't stand up for you. I let her words settle. "You didn't forget," I said, more to myself than to her. "You chose to do it without me." Ava started to cry quietly, her shoulders shaking. "I don't know what's wrong with us, Mom. We've been so caught up in our own lives. We didn't see what we were doing to you. And when you stopped showing up, at first I was mad. Then I was scared. Because I realized I didn't know who you were without us constantly needing you." I looked down at my hands. I didn't know either. She reached over, placing her hand on mine. "I'm sorry. Truly, I've been selfish." I met her eyes. "I don't want you to be sorry because you lost your housekeeper or your emergency babysitter," I said. "I want you to be sorry because you forgot I was a person, a full person, not just someone who exists to make your life easier." She nodded, biting her lip. "I see that now," she whispered. We sat there for a while. Two women who used to be close, now trying to find the language to bridge a canyon neither of us could see until we fell into it. "I'm not angry," I finally said, "but I'm not the same." Ava looked down. "I know, and I want to get to know the version of you I missed." I smiled, a small, tired smile, but it was real. "Then don't just say it. Show me." She nodded. No dramatic hugs, no grand closure, just a quiet truth spoken out loud. I didn't need to yell to be heard, not anymore. It was a few weeks after that quiet conversation with Ava when I received the formal invitation in the mail, a crisp, white envelope, hand-addressed in Derek's tidy print. Inside was a card bordered in gold. "In honor of Mom, a garden brunch. Hosted at Mara's house." A note scribbled at the bottom read, "We want to celebrate you properly. Please say you'll come." I sat at the kitchen table, rereading it over and over. Part of me felt flattered. Another part felt cautious. Was this guilt? A second try at the birthday that never was? A performative gesture to polish the stain they left on my heart? Still, something in me softened. Because it wasn't just that they wanted to throw me a brunch, it was that this time, they were asking me directly. Not planning it behind my back. Not packaging it for social media. They were inviting me as a person, not a prop. I decided to go, but not to play the same role. The morning of the brunch, I got dressed carefully. Not in the appropriate neutral blouse or motherly cardigan they might have expected. I wore a long floral dress with bold colors and soft fabric that flowed when I moved. I styled my hair in soft waves, added a touch of lipstick, and wore the delicate pearl necklace William had given me for our 20th anniversary. I looked in the mirror and saw myself, not the version they were used to, but the woman I had been rediscovering for months. When I arrived, Mara opened the door, clearly startled for a moment. Then she smiled, overly wide, her eyes flickering with nerves. "Lena, you look, wow, beautiful." "Thank you," I said, stepping inside. The house was decorated with taste, garden-themed with fresh peonies and soft green linens. There was a long table set in the backyard under a tent, with place cards and mimosas already poured. It was nice, but it was too nice. Everything looked curated, as if it had been lifted from a magazine spread. It lacked warmth, spontaneity, me. I smiled politely as people trickled in. Derek, Ava with Grace, a few distant cousins. All of them greeted me with cautious energy, unsure whether I'd hug or hold back. I greeted each of them, calm and gracious. But I wasn't here for their comfort. As brunch began, Mara tapped her glass. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," she said, looking around, "and to say, Lena, we're sorry. We didn't do right by you, and today we want to make it right." There were nods. Derek murmured, "Yeah, absolutely," and Ava dabbed her eyes, which had started to mist over. I waited a beat, let the silence stretch. Then I stood. "You know," I said, "for a long time, I thought my love was enough to hold all of us together. That if I kept showing up, kept giving, that would be enough to make me matter." No one moved. But here's what I've learned. Being needed is not the same as being valued, and I've spent too many years being useful, hoping that counted as love. Ava lowered her head. Derek looked away. I stepped forward, gently setting a small gift bag in the center of the table. I brought something today, a little thank you gift, for me. Inside was the same photo album I had wrapped for myself on my birthday. I took it out slowly and opened it. These are the memories I made, the years I poured into all of you, the birthdays I never missed, the holidays I held together, the notes in lunchboxes, the emergency pickups, the forgiveness I gave freely. They leaned in, silent. "I don't need a redo of a birthday," I said. "I needed to be seen then, and I wasn't." I looked up and smiled, not out of anger, but peace. "I've forgiven you. But I've also reclaimed something you forgot I had, myself." Then, with steady hands, I closed the album, placed it back in the bag, and sat down. There was no applause, no rush of speeches, just stillness, the kind that follows truth. And in that moment, I knew I didn't need this brunch. They did. It was almost sunset when I heard the knock. I had just settled into my porch chair with a book and a glass of chilled lemonade. The air was warm, golden light casting long shadows across the lawn. Peaceful. Still. A world away from the chaos and need I used to live in. I didn't get up right away. I stared at the door, half hoping it was just a neighbor, maybe someone looking for a lost pet. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I opened it slowly, and there stood Derek, my son. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe just tired. His hands were shoved in his pockets, eyes darting nervously before landing on mine. "Hey, Mom." "Hi." There was a long pause, the kind of silence where 1,000 unspoken things hang between two people, neither sure which one to pull down first. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and nodded. He entered quietly, glancing around like he was stepping into a museum. Nothing had changed in the house, but he had. Or maybe I had. Or maybe we both had. And that's why everything suddenly felt so unfamiliar. He sat at the edge of the couch, hands folded. I took my chair across from him and waited. "I wanted to talk," he began, "but not over text, not with everyone else around, just us." I nodded once. "All right." He looked down at the floor like he was bracing himself. "I've been thinking about everything, about you, about the way we've treated you. I don't think I fully understood what I was doing, or not doing, until you stopped showing up." I kept my eyes on him. Steady. Calm. "You were always there," he continued, "like clockwork. I took it for granted. I thought that's just who you were. But it wasn't fair. I don't know how we let it get so far." I inhaled slowly. "You didn't let it get far. You pushed it that far. All of you." He winced, but nodded. "Yeah, you're right." I could see it in his face. He wasn't here to make excuses. He wasn't trying to rewind the clock. He was here to face it. I just got used to the idea of you always being there. I didn't realize how selfish that was. You gave so much, and I kept expecting more. Without asking how you were doing, if you were happy, if you felt seen. I hate that it took this long to realize it. I waited a beat before answering. You know what hurt the most? I said, voice even. It wasn't the silence or being excluded. It was realizing that when I stopped giving, everything stopped. I was never part of your lives because you wanted me there. I was there because I made it easy. His face crumpled a bit. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't rush to forgive. I didn't wave it away like I used to. I appreciate that, I said, but I don't need apologies. I need consistency. I need people in my life who show up without needing something in return. He nodded. I want to be one of those people. If you'll let me try. I watched him for a moment. This wasn't the boy I raised. This was a man trying to rebuild trust, plank by plank. And for the first time in a long while, I saw sincerity in his eyes. Not obligation, not guilt, just honesty. I'm not going backward, I told him. I'm not stepping back into the role I played. That woman is gone. But if you want to know the woman I am now, I'd be open to that. His expression softened, like he'd been holding his breath and finally let it go. I do. I really do. We didn't hug, not yet, but something unspoken passed between us. A thread, thin and new, but strong enough to hold if we both kept pulling gently. As he stood to leave, he turned and asked, Would you want to get lunch sometime next week, just us? A simple question, but it meant everything. I smiled. Sure, Derek, I'd like that. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel empty. I sat on the back porch, wrapped in my softest shawl, a book open on my lap, though I hadn't turned the page in 20 minutes. The sun was sinking low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of honey and lavender. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't care. Some moments aren't meant to be rushed. A breeze stirred the chimes hanging above me. They played a soft tune I'd heard 1,000 times before, but now it sounded different. Everything did. I looked around at the small world I had built, this porch, these flowers, the life I had returned to, piece by piece. For years I had made space for everyone else in this world, held their pain, remembered their appointments, fed their children, forgave their missteps. I had poured every ounce of myself into loving them, believing that love meant always being available, always saying yes, always putting myself last. But over these last few months, I had learned something I wished I'd known sooner. Love should never cost you your voice, your worth, your place at the table. I used to believe that being a good mother, a good sister, meant never asking for anything, never needing acknowledgement, that if I just gave enough, they would give it back. But love given from an empty well dries up. It leaves you thirsty, hollow, waiting. And I'm done waiting. I'm not angry anymore. I've let that go. Anger only held me in the same story I was trying to escape. It tied me to the very people I needed space from. No, what I feel now is peace. A still, quiet peace that comes from choosing myself, not in defiance, not as revenge, but because I'm finally listening to the voice I spent decades silencing. The voice that says, you matter too. Now I wake up when I want to. I water my garden. I take my art class every Thursday where I laugh with strangers who know me only as Lena, the woman with the steady brush hand and bold color choices. I see Celia on weekends, and we trade stories over coffee like old friends who've known each other far longer than we have. And I'm reconnecting with Derek, slowly, gently. We've had 2 lunches together. The first was awkward. The second was better. He didn't ask for anything. He just listened. We're learning how to be mother and son again, not by habit, but by choice. Ava sends messages more often now, not long ones, but meaningful. Sometimes she just shares a photo of Grace at dance class with the caption, "She asked about you." I haven't responded to every message, and that's okay, because this time I'm not chasing, I'm receiving. I don't know if things with Mara will ever fully mend. Some rifts don't close all the way, and that's all right too. Closure doesn't always come in the form of a perfect reunion. Sometimes it's simply accepting what is and letting go of what was. I look up at the sky, now streaked in deep orange and indigo. A bird soars overhead, weightless, free. That's how I feel now. Not bitter, not broken, just free. Free from the need to explain myself. Free from waiting for validation. Free from the invisible job of being everyone's emotional backup plan. I smile as I take a slow sip of cold tea. I didn't get the birthday I expected. I didn't get the family celebration I had once hoped for. But what I got was far more valuable. I got clarity. I got strength. I got me back. And from now on, I will never again ask for a seat at a table I had to beg to be invited to. I'll build my own table, set it with love, pour tea into my favorite cup, and whoever comes, comes not because they need me, but because they see me. That's the life I'm choosing. Quiet, true, and finally, mine.